Good afternoon and welcome to Life Moments, a podcast designed to inform, inspire, and to motivate. We discuss topics that are applicable both to your business and personal lives. This is your humble host, Terry Beckstrom, and we're not coming to you from our world broadcast headquarters in Raleigh, North Carolina, but are, in fact, in Sumter, South Carolina, my hometown. As promised, we're going to be interviewing some of the most interesting people on the planet, and our guest today is setting a very high bar. Today we welcome the most interesting person in the world. My guest today is someone that I've known for quite some time, let's say a little over half a century. I'm going to tell you about our guest, baseball legend, Bobby Richardson. Where should I begin? So, there were 3 kids, and so I've, known him since birth. But he is in fact a baseball legend of epic proportions. And I know that he'd prefer that I not talk about his background, but here we go. So, and I'm going to call him Bobby today, and I'm going to put away the Uncle Bobby for the purposes of the show, but Bobby played in the New York Yankees dynasty from 1955 to 1966. He played in over 1,400 games while with the Yankees, won 9 of 10 American League pennants, 1,432 hits, 5-time Gold Glove winner consecutive. The next time a Yankee second baseman would win a Golden Glove would be 2010. 8-time All-Star, 643 runs scored, 390 runs batted in, 73 stolen bases. Still holds the world records over 50 years ago for runs batted in a game, runs batted in a series, hits in a series. Also the record for playing in consecutive World Series games at 30. He was selected to play in 8 American All-Star games, won the Lou Gehrig Memorial in 1963, went to the World Series 7 times with 4 victories, 4 World Series rings. You're the runner-up in votes to the 1962 MVP behind Mickey Mantle. And this one still blows my mind. You are today, in 2018, the only player in the history of baseball to ever be named the most valuable player from a losing team in 1960. You retired from the Yankees and became the head coach of the University of South Carolina, my alma mater, where in 1975, with a 51-6 record, took the Gamecocks to the first College World Series, losing in the final game to Texas. The foundation of the Carolinas' elite status in baseball was laid by you. You're an inductee into the South Carolina Hall of Fame. You were the coach of Coastal Carolina and coach and athletic director at Liberty University, Golden Gavel inductee by Toastmasters International. You had your face on a Wheaties box. You were given a day at Yankee Stadium when you retired. And I believe at that time the only other Yankees that had that honor were Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. The Yankees gave you a new Corvette convertible, which you promptly traded in for a station wagon. You've spoken to hundreds of thousands of people over the years, to include being invited to speak at the White House by President Nixon. You've been friends to 6 presidents. I remember being at your house one time when you handed me a handwritten letter written by Ronald Reagan. I still couldn't believe that. You're a good friend of the recently passed Billy Graham. You've spoken at several Billy Graham crusades. You recently went to his funeral. I believe he stopped by and met Joel Osteen. You're the author of 3 books, The Bobby Richardson Story, Grand Slam, An Impact Player. You have a beautiful wife, my aunt of 62 years, Betsy. You've raised 5 amazing kids, my wonderful first cousins, and you have how many grandkids?
16.
Okay, and how many great-grandkids?
10.
Okay. And you hold 2 honorary doctorate degrees, so I'm out of breath. Where do we go from here? I have a set of questions, but I just want to, again, thank you very much for doing this with me. I am not Bob Costas or Brian Kilmeade, but I'm very fortunate to be sitting here, so thanks for coming. So, first question. Tell us, if you will, Bobby, about your childhood growing up. What was it like?
Well, Terry, I'm honored to be with you today, and it certainly brings memories back of those years long gone by. And when I say long, I've been retired well over 50 years now from the Yankees. And yet I still get letters from young kids who say my grandfather was a Yankee fan, my father was a Yankee fan, and on the internet I know all your stats. Would you sign this picture? And, I'm honored to have been in baseball for such a long time. And it really all started way back when I was about 8 years old, and my dad grew up right here in Sumter, South Carolina. He had a monument business, and he loved baseball. He played baseball, but he had to work and didn't get very far in the baseball world, but he wanted me to have a chance to play. And so my dream was to play baseball, and then some years later I saw a film called Pride of the Yankees, the story of Lou Gehrig. Gary Cooper played the part in the film. And I remember watching that film and thinking, what a great organization. How I'd like to be a part of that. Well, those early days, my dad made me a bat out of a piece of wood. They had marble and granite chips, and I thought balls, but they were really rocks, and think I was playing a baseball game. And it would be a single to right field or maybe a triple if I hit it pretty hard toward left field. And then I played in the Little League level. In those days, it was known as knee pants, not organized like it is today. YMCA had a big part in our life. I love basketball as well as baseball. The school, the playgrounds, the church was all within about a 2-block radius of where I grew up. And so I did it all, and then moved up to the ranks where I went out for my high school team as a freshman in high school baseball team. I'd been playing basketball in tournament play, and we were a couple of weeks late going out. And after 3 days of working out, I got cut. And the coach was very nice. He said, come back and try again next year. There was a big catcher with me, and he made the team. And I told him later, I said, you made the team because you could move the batting cage by yourself. He didn't like that too much, but I did go out for the American Legion program and made the team, and we won the state championship, the regional championship, and then we lost out one game before going to the American Legion World Series in Omaha, Nebraska. And before that last game, they took us out to see that film that I mentioned earlier, Pride of the Yankees. Babe Ruth played his own part in that film. And I remember watching them ride on a train and talked about the legacy of the New York Yankees, and I thought, what a great organization. I'd like to be a part of that. The next year, the New York Yankees had a farm club that had spring training in my hometown of Sumter, South Carolina. Mayo Smith was the manager. Came out and watched me play my high school team, and I did make the team that year. Came over to me after one of the games and said, when you graduate from high school, I'll see to it you have a chance to sign with the Yankees. There was no draft at that time. There were 16 teams in the American and National League. And out of the 16 teams, I was afforded the opportunity of signing with 12 of those teams. It was exactly the same. If you got over a $4,000 bonus, you had to go up and spend 2 years on the parent roster. That'd be a waste of time for a 17-year-old. And so without any bickering at all, I signed with the Yankees. I was given a trip to New York to work out with the Yankees for 3 days. Had a friend in town who had a private plane. He was going to fly me to New York, and I said, I've never been on a plane. Can we go any other way? We did. We hopped on the train, went to Florence, South Carolina, up to New York, checked into the Hotel New Yorker, took a cab out to Yankee Stadium. And for 3 days, I watched the Yankees play, worked out with them before the game, and then I was sent down to work my way back up through the farm system. Spent 2 years in the minor leagues, and at 19 I was called up to the Yankees. Gil McDougall had been hit by a line drive, and they needed a replacement to come in for about a 15-day period. And that was my first 2 weeks with the Yankees, and I can never forget those days, how wonderful it was. And then in 19, needed a replacement to come in for about a 15-day period. And that was my first 2 weeks with the Yankees, and I can never forget those days, how wonderful it was. And then in 1956, which would have been my second year in baseball, I started out with the Yankees. I was 19 years old. Maybe I had just turned 20 at that time. And I stayed with them until they cut down to their 25-man roster. And I was sent back down to AAA. But in 1957, I came up and stayed with the Yankees from then on. And you're right, the Yankees won 9 out of the first 10 years I played. Every year we're in the pennant. 55 and 6 played the Dodgers, 7 and 8 Milwaukee before they moved to Atlanta. 59 was the only year we didn't win. The White Sox won that year. But in 60 we played the Pirates, 61 Cincinnati, 62 San Francisco, 63 the Dodgers, 64 the Giants. And so I played with those great players. Mickey Mantle was there, and Roger Maris was there, and Whitey Ford, and Elston Howard, and Yogi. Long I was retiring from baseball, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah, it's just amazing that at 19 years old, you had multiple offers to play professional baseball, and talk about a dream that most people would never, ever even imagine. To have that is just amazing. So was this, in fact, your dream? Was this what you wanted to do?
Well, it was. I remember so well that as a young boy, and probably I'm talking about 13, 14 years old now, I just knew that I wanted to play professional baseball. I knew I needed to have backup, and so I anticipated going to college, and I actually liked math very much, and I took an accounting course. I even took a business law course in a business school here in Sumter for a little while. But all of those times, my hopes were pinned to a Yankee uniform, and I didn't know what would happen after that. But those first days with the Yankees were wonderful days. I remember the first day that Mickey Mantle came over to me and said, "Hey, kid," and he called me later Rich, but he called me kid then. He said, "Come over here with me a minute." He said, "There are a lot of photographers over there, and when you come over, I'm going to make like I'm showing you around the stadium." He said, "They'll take a picture. It'll be headlines in all the newspapers here in New York tomorrow." And that's exactly what happened the next day. The Daily News and New York Times all had pictures of Mickey showing me around Yankee Stadium. We became buddies and teammates for all of those years, and I did play at a wonderful time. Those were great times in baseball.
Well, it's interesting. And I've listened to you give many interviews, and I told you when we started, I wanted this to be a little different. And it seems like so many of the same questions are asked over and over. But I kind of wanted to drill in on a couple issues. And one you just mentioned a minute ago was the backup plan. Was there something, you look at so many of the athletes today, and they have such great hopes, and then there's an injury that occurs and they're out, or they get cut from the team because the competition is so.
Certainly not a math professor by any means, but I did sign at 17, and because I was playing, I was 2 weeks late attending college the next year. I enrolled at the University of South Carolina, alma mater, and later I coached there, and I was majoring in accounting. I thought I would just enjoy that. I like dealing with figures a little bit, and I thought that would be a good background. After one semester, I realized I was away from home all the time, with baseball and then with college away from my home. And so I enrolled in a business college in my hometown of Sumter. I thought that would work out better for me. Took some business law courses and really enjoyed that, and actually took some Bible college credit at Columbia Bible College. Now it's known as Columbia International University. And I was doing all that while holding an off-season job. The Yankee pay at that time was unbelievable low. It's changed today. Everything's built on finance, but in those days, the minimum salary for the New York Yankees or for any team in baseball was $5,000 a year. Now, my son figured up the number of games that you play in a year, that I was actually making about $35 a game.
Wow.
And you had to get a job during the off season to supplement. And then, of course, I got married young, and we'll talk about that if you'd like, too.
Yes. Sure. And talking about your backup plan, I can assure everybody listening that he's got brilliance in his genes. I would love to tell you about his 5 kids, but I know they've skipped multiple grades, and one of his oldest son got a perfect score, a 1,600 on the SAT, so he's got some brilliant kids. So he could have done, I'm sure, anything that he wanted to. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit. Tell me a little about anything that he wanted to. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit. Tell me a little about your parents. My grandparents, I knew your mother well because she and I were very close. I didn't get to meet your father because he died before I was born. But tell us a little about your parents. What were they like, and what influence did they have? I know your dad had a lot of influence on you.
Well, my dad did. He died early. I say early. He was 67. I was right in the middle of my baseball seasons in New York, and I remember when I got the telegram that he had had a stroke and he was paralyzed on his right side. And I came down from the Yankees, and my sister was a nurse. Your mom was a nurse, and she was able to take care of my dad in those last days. So he wanted me to go back to New York and continue my play. I was one day later back in New York playing, and he did pass away. But as I look back now, he had a tremendous influence. He was in the monument business, marble and granite. His family before him also were in that business. But he'd come home about 5 o'clock in the evening, and the first thing he'd do, he'd take a glove out, and we'd play some catch in the backyard. And that just went on right on up. And then when I made the high school team and American Legion teams, he would come to all the games. He'd sit out in the left field bleachers and never say a word, didn't holler, not outspoken at all. Never any discouragement, always a little encouragement after the game. Just a very simple, boy, you played a good game today. No critical comments at all. But, boy, a tremendous influence in my life. And I think I was so happy, more so for him than I was for myself. In '62, for instance, I was runner-up to Mickey Mantle for most valuable player in the American League, and I think he appreciated it even more than I did. He was sure happy and got to see so many games on Saturday with Dizzy Dean and Pee Wee Reese. One of the first things I did was signing with a bubblegum card. I put 2 or 3 years together and got him a color television set, and he was able to watch those Saturday games, and that just made it enjoyable in those days.
Well, yeah, it's funny you were talking about him playing catch with you as a child. Of course, as you well know, my father was killed when I was 4 years old in a plane crash, and you were a tremendous influence in my life. And I remember distinctly just the spot that I was standing in your backyard when I was very young, and you tried desperately to teach me how to catch a ball. And finally, after quite a while, you looked at me and said, "Terry, it's no use." So I can understand. I didn't get any of those athletic genes, but hey, it's okay. So tell us some more.
That's not true. You weren't that bad, and sort of reminds me of me in golf. They told me to lay off for a couple of weeks and then quit altogether. But I didn't tell you that. I was more tactful.
Well, you are definitely an athlete. So tell us about those early years with the Yankees. What was it like? You were a very important part of the greatest baseball dynasty, an era of all time. Greatest baseball dynasty, an era of all time. I don't think that will ever be duplicated. It has changed so much, and it was just a powerhouse dynasty. And some have said, and I've read in several articles, that you were the glue that kept the Yankees together during that era. But can you tell us about some of those special moments? Maybe a couple in particular was the McCovey catch and that grand slam. Let some folks hear about that.
Well, let me start off by saying the Yankees were the last team to fly. We would have 2 Pullmans and a dining car in between. We had 2 rules. We had to wear a sport coat and a tie into the dining car, and we'd had to leave a 50-cent tip. That was a lot of money in those days, but those were gracious days. In fact, it reminded me of that film, Pride of the Yankees. It showed Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig riding on a train, and that's exactly what we did. And we taught and thought baseball. There weren't a lot of high salaries at that time, but there was a love of the game, and we played together as a team. And in looking back, the Yankees really did dominate during those years, and I played with some wonderful players during that time. And as I think back, I did have some wonderful thrills. You mentioned a couple of them. I think perhaps one of the big thrills I had in the game of baseball was the 1960 World Series. The 1960 World Series, the Yankees were playing the Pittsburgh Pirates. And in the third game of the series, with the bases loaded and 1 out, and we were leading 1-0, I came up to bat, and Casey Stengel, our manager, even though I didn't think it was a good play at the time, put the bunt on. Bunting with the bases loaded with the pitcher up next is not what I consider a great play in baseball. I fouled it off twice, and finally Frank Corsetti, the third base coach, said, "Hit the ball to the right side, stay out of the double play." And fastball came inside, and I hit it with authority, and I was more surprised than anybody when it went out of the park for a grand slam home run and circled the bases and came in, and Stengel's comment to me was, "Good bunt," 4 runs, and that set a record, which means very simply that every time you come up, you got to have some men on base to set a record like that, and this has not been broken as of this broadcast today.
I don't think anybody could make that up. That's just incredible. And that McCovey drive, tell us about that.
Well, that was the 1962 World Series. The Yankees lost that series with Pittsburgh. Ralph Terry gave up a home run to Bill Mazeroski on the very last at-bat of the season, at-bat of the series. He hit the ball out of the park, a walk-off home run. And then he was his pitcher 2 years later when we were playing the Giants. Last inning, Yankees winning by 1 run, and Willie Mays on second base and Matty Alou on third base, and left-handed hitting Willie McCovey, one of the outstanding hitters in all of baseball, Hall of Famer, came up to bat, and Ralph Terry was pitching, and he looked at me at second base and kind of thought I was playing out of position. He took 1 step out to ask me to move over a little bit, but he didn't do it. He said, "Well, he's played a lot, maybe he knows what he's doing." And sure enough, the pitch was made, and McCovey said later he hit one of the hardest balls he's ever hit. It had overspin on it. It came down, looked like a sure base hit. They would have won 2-1, and Our pitcher, Ralph Terry, was named because I caught the ball. It was right to me, and I caught the ball. And Ralph Terry was named Most Valuable Player. He got the 1962 Corvette that Sport Magazine gives at that time. And I didn't see Willie McCovey for 45 years. 45 years later, I was invited to come out to an Old Timers game, and he and I were speaking at a banquet for the Giants. And after not having seen him for 45 years, his comment to me was, "I bet your hand is still hurting." I said, "You hit it hard," and he did indeed.
Well, if we can too, this is so much fun to do. But you always get asked about the same people. But I wanted to ask you about, and you can give me one-word responses, or you can whatever you want to do. But I want to ask about some of the players you played with and worked with, and that were your friends. And I'm going to kind of go through a list here, and if you can just tell us a little about them. The first one probably you want to give a good, funny story about, because he is much loved. But tell us about Yogi Berra a little bit.
Well, Yogi was my teammate all of my years in baseball, and then in 1964 he was named manager of the New York Yankees. He went right from catcher to manager of the New York Yankees, and he was indeed a close friend, and I was at his funeral the other day, an unusual funeral. You had to be invited, and you had a seat assignment, and there were 500 of his very closest friends there. And he fought in the Battle of Normandy, and just a tremendous Navy veteran, honor guard that was there in the flag ceremony. I was really touched, and so was everybody else. But as a player, probably one of the best hitters in all of baseball, but he's really known a lot more for some of the commercials he did. He did an Aflac commercial. It was the funniest thing I ever saw. He was sitting in a barber chair, and they talk about like that. And he made some comments good, and then he looked over at me because they had 3 ducks in there talking. He said, "Those ducks don't really talk." I thought that those ducks really talked. Betsy, my wife's explaining, no, he was trying to tell you that later on they dubbed that in, but it just had a funny way of taking it.
Well, I've got to ask you, was this part of his shtick, or was it real? Did he really talk like that?
He really talked like that, and things he said made sense, just like he said nobody goes to that restaurant anymore. It's too crowded, and it makes good sense. But he got paid $250,000 for doing those commercials, and so he did well in life for a long time.
Well, and I was I got to throw a couple stories in here. One thing that I remember is when Yogi Berra died. The day he died, I was shocked and looked, and I had BBC up, which is the British broadcasting company, on my phone, and BBC had a picture of Yogi there, and he was standing with his back to the camera, and next to him in the picture was you, and he had his arm around you, and what a great picture that was. But I have to tell this quick story because I have to throw a couple of mine in as well. So you did traumatize me, and for this I hold you accountable, but I've forgiven you for it. So when I was, I guess, probably 12 or 13, you took me and your youngest son, Rich, to an Old Timers game at Yankee Stadium. And I didn't know anything other than you were my uncle and that people seemed to really like you, but I didn't realize the magnitude of your fame until we went to New York, and until we all stepped out of the cab as we pulled up to the Yankee Stadium. You looked at me and Rich and said, "Okay, you guys stay close to me. It's going to be a little hectic when we get out." Well, that was an understatement. We got out, and I could see New York City police officers lining both sides of the sidewalk, and they were holding crowds back, screaming, "Bobby, Bobby, Bobby." And it was frightful for a 10 or 11-year-old kid, however old I was at the time. But we got inside, and one of the things you did for me and Rich is you said, "Hey, I'm going to give you guys a ball. I'm going to introduce you to my friends." And you took us into the locker room, and we met all the greats. And I still look back today at the people that I was able to meet, going into Billy Martin's office to have Yogi Berra, Mickey Mantle, all the greats of the 50s and 60s eras were there, and they signed the ball. But the one that I will never forget is when you introduced us to Yogi. He was standing there in nothing but his jockstrap, and it was a traumatic experience for, I'm sure, me and Rich. And I hope one day to get that image out of my mind. But I say that tongue-in-cheek, but what a neat experience.
Let me finish the story, Terry, because I do remember that very well. And the Yankees at that time, the Yankees at that time parked across the street, and we had to walk in, and the crowd was always there every day. And you can imagine if I walked through like that, how it'd be for Mickey Mantle to get out of his car and walk through there. But now the new stadium, they park inside. They don't have to go through a crowd like that. This new stadium is just wonderful, and I've been a part of it. And, you know, one of my big thrills, I've always had a great relationship with the Yankees. And George Steinbrenner called me when the Yankees played over at Shea Stadium for 2 years, and then they, after the reconstruction and everything, they were going to dedicate the new stadium. And he called and asked if I would come up and have the prayer of dedication for the new Yankee Stadium. And that was an honor for me as a ball player to realize he could have called Billy Graham or Cardinal or could have called Bishop Sheen or just anybody, and for him to call me and ask me to have the prayer of dedication. But to finish that story, remember that you and Rich, I told you we'd go play an Old Timers game. And then after the game, I said, well, what did you think of the Old Timers game? He said, well, y'all played? Y'all were outside the concession stand and stood in line the whole time and missed the whole Old Timers game. We only played 3 innings, and so it was all over.
And we did get lost. I'll admit that. Yes. So, but I think you hit a great hit that game.
I got a base hit, and you missed it all.
Yeah, well,
you did.
Congratulations for that. So let's go through a couple more of these. Tony Quebec.
Tony was my roommate in the minors and the major leagues. He was just a wonderful guy. He married a minister's daughter, and we've been friends and continue to be right now. We're the same age. We wanted to retire together, and just have been a wonderful friend. He was a great shortstop, and between Tony and I playing together all those years, we knew exactly what the other one would do, and I think we made a pretty good combination at that time.
Roger Maris.
Roger Maris was a very humble guy, portrayed in a different way. Because he was the one that was going to break Babe Ruth's home run record, and everybody in New York wanted Mickey Mantle to be the one to do that. And so he was portrayed in a little bit of a bad light, actually traded away at the end of his career in an even-up trade for Charlie Smith, infielder from South Carolina, to the Cardinals. But a great player that went on with the Cardinals and brought 2 world championships to them, and one of my close friends.
Wow. Ralph Terry.
Ralph was an outstanding pitcher. We started together as 17-year-olds in upstate New York. Came home with me that day, and because I had a car and he didn't have a car, and then he caught the bus on to Oklahoma. We've been friends. He turned out to be one of the outstanding golfers in the game, played in the men's circuit, and done quite well after baseball.
Johnny Blanchard?
Johnny Blanchard was a guy that was in an unusual position. He had Yogi Berra and Elston Howard in front of him, so he didn't play very much, but he became a great hitter, home run hitter. 1961, when Roger Maris hit 61 home runs, those 3 catches with no DH hit over 60 home runs. In fact, over 62 home runs that year. He was not only a great pinch hitter, but one or the other would play left field on occasion when the other one was catching.
And a couple more. Elston Howard.
Just a real gentleman. He broke the barrier line, the first Afro-American in the American League. Just a wonderful, wonderful guy. He and my son Robbie, he had a son, and my son Robbie, they were the same age and became really close friends. Just a wonderful guy. And his daughter sings the national anthem now at Yankee Stadium, and his wife always comes back each year. They honor her. Elston passed away, and his son passed away at an early age.
And I'm going to whittle down my list because I don't want to keep you too long. But Don Larson, I saw you and Don Larson at an event in Raleigh a number of years ago, and I remember you said, come on over, I'm going to be signing. And I think you stayed with people that were waiting to get their balls signed, their baseballs signed by you guys. And I remember I said, there's no way I'm going to stand in this line. But he would tell us about Don.
Well, he pitched a perfect game in the World Series, and because of that, it's something you never forget. Just like Mazeroski's home run, a perfect game in baseball is something you'll not forget. And because of that, he's been able to come back to Yankee Stadium all these years. We were together just recently at Yankee Stadium, and he's on a walker now, but he took his time and walked out, and the people appreciate him just as much now as they did, remembering that perfect game that he pitched.
And Mickey Mantle. I know that you and Mickey became best friends, and I know you've got a lot to say about Mickey, but give us a kind of a little background on that.
Well, Mickey was the one that when I first came to New York, I was told to field some ground balls and then come up and take some swings in the batting cage. And I fielded the ground balls and came up and stood around the cage, and I wasn't about to step in front of Hank Bauer or Yogi Berra, and Mickey Mantle put his arm around me and said, "Come on, kid, step in here and take some swings." And it started a friendship that lasted a lifetime, 12 years in New York as his teammate. And although we didn't go out after ball games together, he had his group, and Tony Kubek and I would go a different way. We were really close friends. And then that time came when Roger Maris, at 51 years of age, had a battle with cancer. And I was asked by his wife after he passed away if I would have the eulogy and represent the Yankees and speak at his funeral. Mickey was a pallbearer. He'd been drinking a little bit at that time, and when the service was over and it was so cold in Fargo, North Dakota, we went out to our motorhome going back to the hotel, and he sat down by me and he said, "I want you to have my funeral." Well, it caught me by surprise, and I didn't know exactly what to say. I don't think I said anything. And then when I saw him a little bit later at a golf tournament, he said, "Don't forget now you'd have my funeral." And then every time I saw him after that, he would say to my boys, "Come on, you guys ride with me on this golf cart." He said, "You can see your dad anytime." And we had a close relationship. He even had a place together in Boone, North Carolina, at Grandfather Mountain. I remember on one occasion we were both grand marshals of a ski festival. He didn't know how to ski and I didn't know how to ski, but they put us on a lift like we knew what we were doing and took a picture of that. And I remember he was catching an airplane. In fact, he had to catch a plane in Charlotte but take a helicopter from where we were on the mountain to Charlotte. Weather was bad, and he said to Betsy, my wife, "Betsy, let's you and I and Bobby go over and read the scriptures together, and let's have prayer together before I get on that helicopter with the weather bad." And we had a wonderful time those next years. He did so many things. Came to the university, gave a batting exhibition. Came to my hometown. We gave away 2,000 Mickey Mantle bats. And on all of those occasions, we talked about the Lord and the need for him to say yes to the person of Christ. And then not too long after that, he was on national television. Bob Costas interviewed him in a wonderful interview. He had been through Betty Ford. He said, "I don't drink anymore." But he said, "I'm no hero." He was a very humble guy. His father was a miner, and he knew that the Lord had given him wonderful opportunities in baseball. And he felt like he had let his fans down. He said, "I'm no hero. I haven't been a good father. I haven't been a good husband." It took so much courage for him to do that. And then he said, "But I still have a void in my heart." And it wasn't too long after that, we had talked about the Lord on numerous occasions, that I was in Dallas with baseball assistant team bat. And the call came at 5 o'clock in the morning in the hotel. Betsy answered the phone. It was Mickey, and he said, "I want Bobby to pray for me. I'm in Baylor Medical, I think hospital, I guess it is, in Dallas, Texas." And he said, "I'm waiting for a liver transplant. I'm in the midst of chemotherapy." It was Mickey, and he said, "I want Bobby to pray for me. I'm in Baylor Medical, I think hospital, I guess it is, in Dallas, Texas." And he said, "I'm waiting for a liver transplant. I'm in the midst of chemotherapy." And he said, "I just want him to pray for me." And we did have prayer together. And I remember using this verse that day. I said, "Mickey, there's a great verse. It says, 'Delight yourself in the Lord. Find your joy in him at all times. Never forget his nearness.'" And I said, then it says, "Tell God in detail your problems, your anxieties, and the promises of peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep our hearts and minds as we rest in Christ Jesus." Betsy went out and spent the next 2 days with Merlin, his wife. Mickey and I were together. And one more time as I left, he said, "Don't forget you to have my funeral." Several weeks later, the hospital called, and Mickey called and said, "I want you to come out and spend this time with me." He said, "Cancer has come into the new surgery that very much long. I want you to come out." And when I got there, just the wonderful thrill of the smile on his face. And he said, "I want you to know I'm a Christian. I've accepted Christ as my Savior." And I think it was Pete Maravich who had the influence in his life on those last days. He was had a lifestyle very much like Mickey's. Most humble guy I've ever heard or seen. And he made an audio, and Mickey was listening to that audio of his testimony. And that's what had the impact in his life. And I did have his funeral in Dallas, Texas, on national television. And the one thing, Terry, that I remember more than anything, Mickey had heard me use these words, and he said, "I want you to use them on my funeral." He says, "Your name may not appear down here in this world's Hall of Fame. In fact, you may be so unknown that no one knows your name. The trophies, the honors, the flashbulbs here may pass you by, and neon lights are blue. But if you know and love the Lord, then I have news for you. This Hall of Fame is only good as long as time shall be. But keep in mind, God's Hall of Fame is for eternity. They cheer like mad until you fall, and that's how long you last. But in God's Hall of Fame, by just believing in His Son inscribed, you'll find your name. I tell you, friend, I wouldn't trade my name, however small, that's written there beyond the stars in that celestial hall, for every famous name on earth or glory that this year. I'd rather be an unknown here and have my name up there. And certainly that last commitment, He has His name up there and will indeed spend eternity in heaven with Christ.
You know, and listening to that too, and I did watch that funeral live. I remember that well. And, you know, you think about people like Mickey Mantle and the things that he and you both accomplished in life, but that in reality, his most important decision in life came at that moment when he decided to accept Christ. And what a great testimony that is, especially for the folks that are big fans of Mickey, knowing where he'll be. Tell us, if you will, a little about your faith. That's what really establishes you as who you are. And unfortunately, there are not a lot of athletes out there today that are, in my opinion, great role models. And I look at people today like Tim Tebow, who is not afraid of his faith. And can you talk a little about your faith and how that affected your sports career? And
well, Terry, I remember in particular that when I was 12 years old, that's an impressionable age, and I had two wonderful Sunday school teachers. One was a farmer, one worked for the power company. And they, every Sunday, so faithful there in attendance, opened God's Word, explained the Scriptures in such a way that it became such that I knew that I needed a Savior. They made an appointment with me to speak to the pastor. When I did, he shared some verses that turned my life around. When Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. I knew that I had displeased God in many ways. And he pointed out the penalty is death, and not in heaven, but in hell. But I was so grateful that day that I responded to recognize that I was indeed a sinner and asked the Lord Jesus to be my Savior. And the verse to seal my decision way back then was John 1:12. But as many as received Him, meaning Jesus Christ, to them gave He power to become the sons of God, even those that believe on His name. And so not only did I come to know the Lord, but I met a young girl not long after that who not only knew Christ as Savior, but Lord of her life. And Betsy and I have made a wonderful team together. She was grounded in the Scriptures. She's a wonderful witness. And you mentioned some of my children, and I just say very simply that they're pastors now. They're missionaries in the family because of Betsy's influence. And so the Lord has been so faithful. And Betsy describes it in two words, amazing grace.
Well, and I can attest to that. I so much appreciate your wife and just being around her. Her wisdom is it's just mind-boggling. So that is you're very, very right in that aspect. So getting back to some of the other questions before we wrap up, you left at 30 years old. You left your baseball career, kind of in what many would say was the height of your career. You certainly were a phenomenal athlete and had no issues. Why did you leave at 30?
Well, Tony Kubek and I roomed together. Tony was a wonderful Christian. He just opened the Scriptures and found out for himself, different background, that he needed a Savior, and not only married a Lutheran minister's daughter, but just had a real wonderful relationship with the Lord. And the two of us agreed that we had missed out on some priorities in our life. We had played baseball. They had won 9 out of the first 10 years we played and playing in the World Series, but we were missing it with our family. He got married a little later than I did. My kids were a little older, but we both Yankees who had won 9 out of 10 years. And Sports Illustrated found out about it. They sent a photographer over, and they were going to put us on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And what happened right after that was that Ralph Houck took over as general manager, and he came to us and said, we've just signed a boy by the name of Bobby Mercer, and I want one of you two guys to play one more year and break him in. Well, we talked and finally decided I would retire and Tony would play one more year and break him in. Tony got called in a reserve program, playing touch football. He got a pinched nerve, and Mayo Clinic said he couldn't play baseball again. It might result in a permanent paralysis. And so he decided, we've got a gentleman's agreement. One of you do it. Will you play one more year? Well, I was glad to do that, and I did that. And the Yankees were so gracious. They not only gave me that 1 year, but they gave me an extension of 4 years just to decide what I wanted to do. And I, about 3 years later, decided I wanted to be the baseball coach at the University of South Carolina. And so I called the Yankees and I said, I'd like for you to release me so I can become the baseball coach at the University of South Carolina. And they said, wait a minute now. If you want to, you can be our major league coach, you can be our broadcaster, or you can be our AAA manager. And I said, no, the reason I'm getting out is the travel involved, the separation from family. Thank you very much. And then he said, well, when you get settled down there, give us a call. We'll bring the Yankees down to play your ball club. And so 4 years later, in 1974, we lost out to Miami by 1 run, and I called the Yankees, and I said, I'm ready for you. And they kind of laughed and said, we got a little problem. And I thought that was a no. And he said, we're traveling north from spring training with the Mets. Yogi was managing the Mets at that time. And he said, would it be all right if the Yankees and Mets come down and play your ball club?
Wow.
So we played 3 innings against the Yankees, 3 against the Mets. They played each other, the Lions, put our team on the map. And then right after that, the fans stuck with us. 15,000 people came out, and then we finished second in the nation in the College World Series right after that.
Wow. Well, that's you certainly established the legacy for South Carolina baseball, and as an alumni, I can say that we're very thankful for that. So, a couple quicker questions here that go to just what's going on today. So, how has professional sports changed since the era in which you played? What do you see as the major changes?
I see the biggest change is finance. The finance, everything depends on the money coming in from television, and it's centered around that. Certainly the players are getting unbelievable salaries now. It makes it difficult on the guy that just wants to go out to the ball game because the ticket prices are so high. But I would just say it's the same game of baseball. It's played a lot the same. The equipment's a little bit better. Schedule's a little bit different now. Interleague play is a part of the game. But I think the big difference is just finance. They're rewarded handsomely. It would be hard for me now to say if I was playing for the Yankees and they were paying me, let's say, $6 million, it'd be hard to say, well, I think I'm going to retire now.
Right.
A little easier back when I was playing.
And, going to that, are the athletes different today? And has their attitude, have the attitudes of the athletes changed because of that?
It's more of a profession. It's year-round. We used to quail hunt in the off-season. That's how we'd keep in shape. Now the athletes have strength coaches, and they stay at it all year-round. They're in much better physical condition than we were. The equipment is better. The travel is better. But it's a serious business, and if you don't perform, you don't get paid. So in that sense, it's pretty much the same.
Well, and some of those paychecks are just insane. So who was your hero growing up, or who were your heroes?
Well, Phil Rizzuto was a little guy, and he had gone to a tryout camp, and they'd turn him away, and then all of a sudden there was a chance for him to sign with the Yankees. And I just liked him because he was a shortstop. Turned out I room with Phil Rizzuto my first year. His son played for me when I coached at the University of South Carolina along with Whitey Ford's son. And so, but he was the guy that I looked up to. And it was interesting because when I first signed with the Yankees, I would go in and play defense for Phil Rizzuto in those last innings when Casey Stengel might pinch hit for him.
Well, so what does your crystal ball tell you about professional sports today? Where are we heading? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my crystal ball doesn't give me now, but I just say this. I did go up for the Old Timers game just recently the other day, and, of course, I don't play in the Old Timers game anymore, but I watched some of the older players, and then I watched the younger ones like Andy Pettit, who came back for the first time. Nick Switcher came back, and the enthusiasm they had. And so I think baseball's going to be all right. I think that the salaries will get in line, and I think maybe the game of baseball will be the national game, the tradition of our country.
Well, I can't let you go without asking you, do you have any comments on the protest kneeling during the national anthem? What are your thoughts there? Well,
I just can't imagine that somebody would protest for some other thing by not standing and putting their hand on their heart if they served our country, put the salute where it should be and represent our country. So I would just think that they should find other ways to protest. Protesting's all right if you're doing it for the right thing and you do it the right way. That's just the wrong way.
And the last question, what advice do you have for young athletes today, whether it's just the kid playing sports because he enjoys the game, or because it's a kid's playing because their parents want them to play, or the serious athletes out there who think that they have a shot at the pros? What kind of advice do you give for our athletes today?
Well, I had my two boys that were good athletes. They were both captain of their college teams, and Robbie actually was good enough to come and play for me at the University of South Carolina. But both had other priorities. Robbie turned out to be a pastor, and he's in Michigan now, planted 2 churches up there. Number 2 son is also a pastor. Number 3 son was asked the question all the time, are you going to play baseball? And he said, no, I'm not. And he played basketball. He played tennis. He's a businessman now, and he started out with Chick-fil-A doing the hiring for Chick-fil-A, and he's in business doing well. And I think as I think back, I think young boys need to just have fun, enjoy playing. I think the travel ball getting out of hand just a little bit. I think there are dads that center in on, I want my boy to make this money and play in the major leagues, and the pressure is put on them at an early age, and I don't think that's good. But I think in the end that the boys, you don't see them going out and just playing pickup games like when we were coming along. Everything's too organized now. But I think our country is such that it's going to work itself out. It'll all work out well.
That's good. Well, I can certainly understand what you're talking about with the travel teams, having had friends who have had some crazy schedules. So before we go to, I want to talk about a couple things that have happened with me, with you that I can't help but mention. But I remember when I was young one time, my mother came to me and said, your uncle called and he's on the way to the house to pick you up. Be outside waiting when he gets there. And during that time, you were running for Congress. And you had rented a motorhome, and I came outside. I didn't know what went on, but I got into the motorhome, and you were in there and said that we were going to go around. You were speaking at a couple of venues, and you had one of your friends with you. You introduced him to me, and I sat down in the motorhome in the back, just across from the gentleman. And as we drove around that day, I just stared at him. I was not... I didn't know who he was, and I just stared at him, and he stared back at me. And I remember it was kind of like just a stand down with stares the whole time. And the man didn't talk that much. I remember at the end of the day, you said, hey, did you have a good time? And I said, I did. I said, but I don't like that friend of yours. He wasn't very nice. And I remember you put your hand on me and said, well, Mr. DiMaggio doesn't speak that much. He doesn't have a lot to say. Well, later I found out I was driving around in a van all day with Joe DiMaggio. So who can come up with stories like that?
Can I say a word about that?
Absolutely. Who can come up with stories like that?
Can I say a word about that?
Absolutely.
Well, first of all, Gerald Ford talked me into running for Congress, and I had no aspirations for political office, but I felt like I could vote the right way. I found out in a hurry that wasn't for me, and I did lose the election, and that was probably the best thing that ever happened. The only other thing I've ever done politically was when Ronald Reagan ran for president. He was running in the primary against John Connally. And both our governor and our senator was for John Connally. And so I was asked with General Mark Clark to head up South Carolina for Reagan. And I traveled around with him. What a difference that day when he started talking about the Cubs. He had broadcast some of the Cub games. He loved baseball. But what a wonderful president he made when he became our president and led our country in such a way. Now, one other thing, Mickey Mantle also came in with DiMaggio. And Mickey said, I wouldn't vote for Bobby for dog catcher. And then he'd start laughing.
Well,
he was right.
It's probably a good thing you didn't win, because what would an honest man do in Washington anyway? So I don't know. Hey, so another couple things that I'm thinking about too is, I've had the opportunity to hang out with you a lot. I've probably heard you speak in excess of 100 times in different parts of the country. I used to ride with you and Aunt Betsy. And boy, I've got a lot of good memories about going. As I got older, you used to let me drive while you would catch some shut-eye in the car. But it was a lot of fun. But some of the things I remember, one in particular of the events that I went to, I remember in Florida when I was in Miami, my wife and I were invited by you to come to a game. And we went it was a charity game in Fort Lauderdale. And I got to see you and one of my favorite actors, Tom Selleck. playing baseball. And I took the picture of you and Tom Selleck. I remember you had quite a
picture, and that was because Joe DiMaggio's name was on the Children's Hospital in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And this was a benefit game with the money going to the Children's Hospital. And Tom Selleck was playing first base, and I was on second. I think Clete Boyer was there, Brooks Robinson that day. And my sister, your mother, said, "Can I get a picture of you?" And I said, "Tom, would you mind a picture?" And he stood up, and she dropped her camera. Unfortunately, you had one, and you took the picture. She was so shocked. He was a good baseball man as well as certainly a wonderful actor, and meant a lot to many people.
Well, I know he loves baseball. So another event that I was invited to is you and Aunt Betsy were coming up. You came to Durham to a fundraiser event. I believe it was for ALS. And I don't know, admittedly, a lot about sports, but I knew when I walked in there was a man standing there. It was a black tie event, and he was standing there waiting to see you with great anticipation. And you introduced me to him, and other folks were talking to you, and I got to sit there and talk for a number of minutes with this gentleman. And he was telling me that my uncle was the person that he actually admired, that was his hero. And that gentleman was Dean Smith, who was a basketball legend. And what an opportunity that was. But I've got to mention one other thing that through the years, you know that you and I have talked back. We enjoy playing on the telephone and doing different accents. And we've had a lot of fun over the years. But you know that I've called you more than a few times to either speak to somebody, and I've had you sign balls. But I remember one instance in particular when I was in Miami. One of my U.S. attorney friends, who was older than me, he was from New York. But in his office, when I first walked in there, the walls were adorned with absolutely gorgeous pictures of the 1960s Yankees. He had a big, beautiful picture of the 1960 Yankees that was hanging on his wall, prominently displayed, and other Yankee memorabilia around the office. And he was busy sitting at the desk, and I said, "So you're a Yankees fan, are you?" And he said, "Are you kidding me?" The guy was from New York, so I would add my accent in, but I won't do that to offend. But I said, "So you're a Yankees fan?" He said, "Absolutely." He said, "Biggest fan ever." And I said, "So you probably could name all of these players?" He said, "Are you kidding?" "Absolutely, I could." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to pick one out." I said, "You come over here and you tell me if you can tell me who that is." And I pointed to you, who I think in that picture, you were in the center of the picture. And he looked at me with a smirk on his face and said, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "That's the greatest second baseman of all time." He said, "That's Bobby Richardson." And I said, "Are you a big fan of his?" He said, "You're not kidding. Ball games at Yankee Stadium." And that was my father's and my favorite player. He said, "He's a man of character," and he's going on telling me all about you. Of course, things I already knew. But so he goes back to his desk. He was happy and that he could show me that he did, in fact, know his Yankees. And I said, "You don't mind if I make a quick phone call, do you?" And he said, No. And so I got on the telephone, and I called you up, and I said, "Bill," I said, "somebody wants to say hi to you." And I handed the phone to him, and he picked it up. And his face just turned absolute white. He stood up as if somebody had walked in with a flag at attention. And he said, "Bobby Richardson." And I looked over, and his hand was shaking. And you talked to him for several minutes. And he hung up the phone, didn't even know I was in the room after that. He sat there and called person after person. His father, who was a federal judge, he called him and said, "You'll never believe what just happened. I just got to speak to Bobby Richardson." And who was a federal judge, he called him and said, "You'll never believe what just happened. I just got to speak to Bobby Richardson." And boy, he told me after that, he said that was one of the greatest moments of my life. And I've seen that more than a few times. And boy, just what an impact you've had in so many lives. You've spoken to thousands and thousands, I'm sure, over the years, if not hundreds of thousands of people, to different crowds. And you've made a huge impact on a lot of lives, and including mine when you were a young, influential guy without a father, and you're looking for role models. You were there for me, and I appreciate that very much. And I used to always joke with my uncle that I didn't know how a man was supposed to sit when I was younger. And I used to watch my uncle, and he sat with his legs firmly spread apart and his shoulders back. And I always took that up as the way that I would stand. So anything that you want to say before that up is the way that I would stand. So anything that you want to say before
well,
we
I was going to say briefly that when you and Dean Smith were together, and I remember y'all were in black ties that day, it was a wonderful picture, and I've still got that picture, but that was in honor of Catfish Hunter, who had Lou Gehrig's disease, and that was an affair that was in Raleigh in his behalf, in his honor. What a great guy he was. His widow was there in New York just the other day. Terry, thank you for letting me just say these words, bring back wonderful memories, and I'll just close by saying that I'm just grateful that not only did I get to play for the Yankees, but the opportunities and the doors that were open for me to have an opportunity of talking to folks around the country and sharing a little bit of what the Lord Jesus means to me. And it's been a wonderful road for me. I'm not one of those guys that goes out and shouts on a street corner, but my faith has meant a lot to me, and I'm glad to share it in a very tender and tactful way. Thank you very much, Terry.
Well, Bobby Richardson, a baseball legend and true hero in life, more so for who he is than this baseball legacy. You're a man of unshakable character, a humble and kind man beyond words, and you've had a tremendous impact on so many people, especially the man sitting in my seat right now. Thank you for giving the world the picture of an amazing athlete who's not ashamed to stand firmly in his faith for God. The world desperately needs more role models like Bobby Richardson. So thank you, sir, for your wisdom, and thank you for your time today. Hope you enjoyed the show. Tell your friends and family about it, and join us next Friday for a new episode. Until next week.